Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio, number 77. How wrong is Alison? That's the title. We're
So
here.
wrong. So wrong. She's wrong about everything. That fucking bitch and her internalized wrongness.
Yes, that's right. So what we're going to do is something special. We're going to look at Alison's video, How the Left Won and Trump's Feast of Fools. And we are going to Rantzerk it. And Alison's not here, so it's like we're doing it behind her back, and there's something so delicious about it.
So sweet. So sweet. Oh, I am going to be like so unbelievably cunty tonight.
Okay.
I got my cunt on, and yeah.
So yes, the worm has turned. The shoe is on the other head, and or foot. I don't know. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First, I just want to let you guys know who's here. If it isn't obvious, we have Anna Cherry, we have Karen, we have myself, Mike, and Hannah. Why did I say we have myself? I don't know. Shut up. So
just to make sure everybody knows that you are in fact here and not a figment of their imagination.
Right. Yes, I am in fact sort of not really here. I mean, it's like
unless you identify
thing.
as a figment of everyone's imagination, and then they have to respect that.
What are your personal pronouns, Doge?
Doge self, Doges.
Dogeness.
Dogeness. His Dogeness.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's get into it. Yes, HBR Civil War. It begins. Are you on Team Alison or Team Dr. Rantzerker?
I'm on team myself. I've always been on. I've always been a freak. I just hang out with you guys because it's convenient.
I don't care for team. I'm not really big on pop. Wait, do they still sell that?
No.
Oh, okay. See? I really am not.
All right.
All right, let's do this. So I'm going to let this play for a bit until, and if you guys feel like there's a specific point you want to respond to, just let me know. But I'm going to let it play until I think we've gotten to a place where we can sort of talk.
The Feast of Fools. A colorful celebration in which the social order...
Karen, you got to mute. I'm sorry. I'm getting feedback on your end.
Because okay, fuck. Now I got to go to a different tab.
No, what you can do is, if you can't mute, you could just go into the actual side tube and mute. Well, you can't do that because then you won't be able to hear it. Yeah, you have to. Something's got to happen.
Oh my god, give me a second and I'll open it in a new freaking window. Okay, here we go.
The Feast of Fools.
A color.
That's okay. That's where. Did it pause?
I paused it, but I'm just gonna... Okay, and... Fuck. You know, this whole SciTube thing is bullshitty and annoying.
It ain't
I'm
that
just
bad.
saying.
You're still in here.
It is.
Alright, so it should... I'm the leader, so I should be in control of what people see. So, alright.
Okay, I'm gonna mute myself on the regular thing, and... Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Order is turned upside down. Power and impunity are bestowed upon the downtrodden, the ignored, the silenced. The village idiot becomes the pope, deacons become bishops, the low are made lordly, and the lordly made low. It was a break from the continuous grind of piety expected from adherents to the church during the Middle Ages, a break from control and authority, a temporary lull. In the military, new recruits are subjected to a verbal barrage 6 days out of 7. Then they're given a break on the 7th. The reason why is that as long as people get a break, they'll endure any kind of depredation. Reprieves, rest stops, liberty, shore leave, subjecting people to pressure and then taking it off for brief moments teaches them to endure. Endure the impossible, endure the unspeakable, endure without rebellion. That's why the church had the Feast of Fools. In response to my previous video, How the Left Won, Part 3, a lot of people said that the right's recent victory in the presidential election is evidence that the left hasn't won. I wish I had been able to cover the Aluminum Company of America's story before the election, but I got sidetracked with my alleged destruction of the men's rights movement. So today, I'm going to cover the anatomy of the Church of Women Worsting and explain why the left never loses. Not even this time. There are two organizing forces that shape human society. The first force is gynocentrism, the tendency to center the protection and provision of women in order to further society's reproductive aims. Until we find a society in which women are treated as expendable in the protection of men and in which women take on the riskiest tasks to acquire resources for men, all societies thus far discovered are organized around gynocentrism. A subset of gynocentrism was identified and codified by Charles Fourier when he coined feminism and defined it as judging social progress by the liberty afforded women. Fourier's feminism wasn't just an organizing force, it's also a moral principle. The feminist conception of social progress is that female liberty is an absolute good. All other considerations, including the freedom and safety of others or non-women, is subordinate to granting freedom to women. The second organizing force that shapes human society is resource acquisition. This force is represented by gross domestic product, corporate profit, piles of grain, cured meat, money. The reason why resource acquisition is the second organizing force of society is because throughout human history, human reproduction hasn't been limited by women, but by access to resources. Human offspring are the most resource-intensive offspring on the planet, so resource acquisition is a particularly acute biological imperative for us. Resources enable the pursuit of superior protection and provision for women as well. In fact, if one sees liberty as a resource, feminism is the moral imperative to afford women as much of the liberty resource as possible. However, resource acquisition only provides a counterbalance to gynocentrism, not a counter.
Anna, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. This is something that came from chat, actually, that I feel like a lot of people might be feeling because I was like part of this sort of group. And I kind of want to clarify and go back over some of these things that Alison has mentioned so far. And specifically, it's a thing, Kalake or Kalake, CA Lake, whatever. He is asking who is saying that Alison destroyed the MRM and that he's literally never heard anyone say that but Alison. And as a sort of latecomer to the controversy myself, I understand the feeling. It's like, what the hell's going on? Who's saying anything? Okay, so from what I understand, there's some one angry dude with some random chicks who like yells at his, like webcam about Alison being a Saudi apologist after she said something not at all related to that. And apparently there's people saying Alison is reading the MRM. I don't know. Like in general, I really don't like to talk about people behind their back in any way because it's like it's cowardly to the point where it doesn't accomplish anything. It's like, let's talk to someone's face, but it's like I understand what we're doing here, obviously, and it might come off as like super cringy. Alison's like doing this, I'm leaving MRM, like hyper cringe, like what the fuck is happening, Alison? What are you doing? What is this cringe? But you got to understand that she's just responding perhaps maybe a little giving too much attention to some trolls that are like just yelling at her.
No. It isn't just trolls. It's actually people that she and I both know, that she and I are both friendly with, who actually, when she uploaded her first video on this whole series, in this series of videos on this particular topic, they actually, there was at least one who is who I'm very fond of, she's very fond of. We thought there was a certain amount of trust there and a certain amount of benefit of the doubt. We would have assumed that, and he just kind of took that video to mean that she had abandoned the MRM. And that meant that, and he was sort of like, I knew that she was just going to like leave us in the lurch and she was just going to throw us all under the bus and blah, 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 blah. Right. And I think that because like the criticism over it hasn't been massively widespread. Right. But the people that some of this criticism is coming from, or some of these expressions of you've betrayed us, because they're coming from people who are, very, very involved in this and have been for a long time, and we feel close to, both Alison and myself feel close to some of these people, right? Who are essentially like, we knew you would just fuck us over, right? Like that they were willing to essentially give her the least charitable interpretation instead of essentially saying maybe she's going somewhere interesting with this, right? Which it would have been what my assumption would be, given her, 13-year record of advocating for men's issues and stuff like that, right?
Not to mention her long record of having this type of, interesting outlook on things, where she
And very
looks at things
subversive.
from a different angle, and
Yeah.
she describes things from a different angle, to the point where, like, numerous times, satire of hers has been mistaken by mostly feminists. It's been more rare for MRAs to make that mistake, but mostly feminists have mistaken her satire for being serious.
Well, and
Some deliberately, and others because they're just not able to parse
yeah,
it.
but and a lot of it too has to do, I think, with I think that most MRAs are very much of the opinion that Alison is a net benefit to this movement, but I don't know. Like, there's a reason why her channel didn't take off the way mine did, let alone the way Sargon's did.
Shots
And
fired.
he's not an MRA. I mean, he talks about the same things, right? And he's way more popular than I am at this point. Bearing and other anti-SJWs and stuff, right? Is because she's much less accessible. She's extremely cerebral and esoteric and very, like, you have to really work, right, to understand what she's getting at. And it's not because she's not explaining it properly or she's not explaining it plainly. I think it's because the ideas themselves are so counterintuitive, right? They are so against the grain of what just feels right to all of us, right? That we just don't pick them up in the same, like, it's the difference between soundbite politics and actually having to explain why the wage gap is a load of hooey, right?
Well, and that's something that in the 60s and 70s, that was a common way of approaching things. That was, people were very much like that in dealing with stuff. We've gotten to a point now where we are a meme and soundbite society.
Yeah.
And people aren't used to that, and so they're not looking for it to happen. And at first, they don't get it. And I've noticed with Alison that when they do get it, the minute that they do get it, they're like, "This is awesome."
Yeah.
But before they get it, a lot of times they get pissed off because they think she's doing something entirely different than she actually is.
Yeah, there's like a huge resistance. And there's even if they don't, like, even if they don't assume she's doing something the opposite of what she actually is, there's still, I think a lot of people are still going to resist the ideas until something clicks in their mind, until that last puzzle piece, she puts that last one into place and they're like, fuck, oh my god, now I can see the whole fucking thing, you're right. And so essentially, I think that that's what this, like, I don't think that this was just trolls. And I do think that, a lot of the, because we had, it wasn't just feminists and it wasn't just, the feminists who are sort of friendly and sort of having a dialogue with certain MRAs who were screaming at us about being Islam apologists and stuff like that, right? I mean, like, there were people like Tyler Preston, right, who were flat out saying, this is Islam apologia and blah blah blah, right? I think that there is a tendency among all humans to knee-jerk when you even question a set of beliefs that they consider to be just a given, right? And we're expanding the scope of questioning. That's, I think, essentially what our job is. And Alison is at the thin end of the wedge as far as that goes, right? Which makes her work highly inaccessible to people right now. I think that give it 100 years if we actually succeed in this project. Give it 100 years, and she will be the Nikola Tesla to my Thomas Edison. I think that that's absolutely 100% something that could happen, right? In terms of the quality of her ideas versus, I'm just able to present something that's highly accessible to, incrementally to an audience, right? And never really threaten their safety, never really threaten their comfort level. I think Alison is one of those people in a lot of ways. She's like Paul Elam. Paul Elam does it with the hotness of his rhetoric, right? His polemics, that he's pushing the bounds of the conversation and giving us all more room to operate it. And she is pushing the bounds of what are ideas that can even be conceived of. And that gives us all more room to operate in. And so she's really the one who's blazing the trail for everybody. And because of that, there's not very many people walking directly behind her, right? And a lot of the time she's going to end up being misunderstood. I think that's probably a lot to do with it.
Yeah. All right. And people, I think, like you were saying, I think people have a tendency to take, what they see when it says why I'm no longer an MRA or whatever, and they take it literally without even trying to figure out what direction this whole thing is going in. And they also, I think that maybe part of it has to do with the fact that the MRM is like, it in some ways it feels so much like an uphill battle that everything that looks like it might be a setback feels like a gigantic blow, and you start seeing problems where there are no problems because you're expecting problems.
Well, yeah, I think honestly the MRM and the larger manosphere is in a constant state of suppressed hostilities in a lot of ways. It's like a constant state of conflicting interests and conflicting personalities. Like this is not a cause that's conducive to a cohesive movement. It really isn't. Like you might think that feminists have their arguments over this, that, and the other. Their arguments over trans exclusionary or trans inclusive and all of that stuff, right? Sex positive versus sex negative. Okay, transubstantiation, is this really the blood and body of Christ, or is the wine and the cracker just a load of crap, right? Those are arguments that are extremely petty, right, when it comes to the actual presuppositional assumptions, right, going on, which is Christ the Son of God, and did he die for our sins? Yes, all Christians believe that. There you go, right? We don't even necessarily have the equivalent of was Christ the Son of God, and did he die for our sins? We don't have that, right? We have people who are pro-evolutionary psychology. We have people who are anti-evolutionary psychology and very much social constructionists. We have people who think that we can bring about an egalitarian society where everyone's treated equally and gender doesn't matter. And we have people who think that that's never going to happen, right? We have such a broad base. So we are really only united by a set of goals or a set of problems that we want to raise awareness for. But we haven't even agreed necessarily on what's causing those problems. We haven't necessarily agreed on whether those problems can even be solved, right? So and then we have the issue of personalities and rivalries, and the pickup artists embarrass all of the MRAs, right? And they need to just disappear off the face of the earth because they give all of us a bad name. And then the radical MGTOW, they should just shut up and fuck off because they make us all look like women haters. And and are the red pill, they need to just fucking just stay out of our men's rights and never comment there, because feminists will go and find their comments in our men's rights and find out they've been commenting in are the red pill, and oh my god, we're gonna all look like women haters. And like, we have all of that shit going on, right? And Yeah, that's nothing. That's nothing like nothing like the petty grievances that feminists have with each other. So
Right, right.
Well, and there's something that this is something that we're a battle that we're constantly rehashing within the movement. There's a sort of a conflict between the need to promote something that goes against the grain of society, compassion for men, and not just compassion for men, but equal compassion to the compassion that we have for women, which is it's unheard of, probably throughout human history, to have equal compassion for men, and then also the interest in making our ideas popular. And the thing is, we have this misconception that we can get our opponents and the fence sitters that have a vested interest in remaining or believing themselves to be neutral parties, basically middle grounders. And middle grounders, they're not moderates, they're false moderates. They take a position between two other positions, and by defining those two positions as both being extreme, whether they are or not, they consider themselves to be moderates. But if you take a position between a moderate position and an extreme position, labeling that moderate position doesn't make it extreme. It just puts you in the middle where you're sort of extreme. And you are mistaking sort of extreme for being moderate. You know, if you had two positions where one position was, everybody should have the right to just punch people in the jaw whenever they're angry, and the other position was violence is wrong, the moderate position between those two positions is still advocating violence. It's still saying, well, there might be some situations where being angry justifies just punching someone in the jaw. Well, no, that's still advocating violence. It's not moderate. It's still extreme. And we're never going to be popular. We're never going to be, we're never going to persuade ideologues who are invested in their particular ideology as a group to like what we do. Especially not the ones who make money off of it, especially not the ones whose political power depends on sticking with their ideology. And we're not going to get people who are invested in seeing themselves as moderates to change either. And I mean, this is something that I've encountered over and over and over again in various men's rights forums and other political forums, in non-political forums where political stuff gets brought up. There are certain types of mentalities that you cannot appeal to. And it's okay to not be appealing to those people. And the thing that we need to do is not let that stuff keep us from talking about the issues and focusing on the things that we focus on. With the bottom line being, are we defending a human right? And are we defending keeping that human right genderless and raceless? This is something that we as a movement can do. We don't have to try to be popular. We don't have to try to get everybody to like us. And we don't have to agree on everything. And this probably is a fight that we're going to keep having within the movement, because people have a tendency to want to be liked. But the fact is, no matter what we do, because we are asking for something that, like I said, it goes against sort of the grain of society, there are always going to be people who oppose us. There are always going to be people who look at us as hate mongers. There are always going to be people who view sympathy for men or compassion for men, consideration for men's human rights, as an attack on women. And as MRAs, it's our job to self-examine. Are we doing what we're accused of? If we don't see it that way, and the arguments that it is that way are not persuasive, then it's our job to soldier on. And that's what we're going to do.
Well said. Thanks. We're going to keep going because we're about 3 minutes in, but just to recap, Alison has established the two important forces, one being gynocentrism, the other being resource acquisition, and how those things actually interact with each other. So we're going to continue on and find out what else she's got going on.
Resource acquisition is not a moral imperative, like feminism. If resource acquisition is the engine, then feminism is the steering wheel. When we focus on fixing the engine, that doesn't mean we decided to get rid of the steering wheel, setting the direction of travel. The right represents our desire for resource acquisition and defense of those resources. The left represents our desire to give those resources to women. Another way to look at it is this. The left is like a rock climber, and the right is the anchor the rock climber sets into the rock. If the rock climber overreaches, she'll never fall further than the anchor point that she set in the rock. The left drives American society towards the goal of increased female liberty. When the resources run out, or our patience at being driven towards the left's goal is at an end, we elect a Republican candidate who will refocus briefly on fixing the engine, consolidating the moral gains that the left has made, and giving everyone those gains have cost a brief respite.
Respite, Allison. Zing. No. But
Either way, actually, I think. But no, I think that's a really good point. That is a really good point. The right has never really been able to push back. All it has been able to do is halt the progress.
yeah, they're the brakes.
Right?
I mean, they can
Probably the
pump the
feminists,
brakes, but they can't go backwards.
Yeah, no, there's no reverse on this fucking car.
No.
And the problem is that we have the left pushing for something that doesn't actually exist. Liberty without responsibility and accountability. And if you don't have responsibility and accountability, you really don't have true liberty. You have chaos. You have the ability to get yourself into loads of trouble, but at some point you're still dependent on others to fix things for you because you don't have responsibility and accountability. This is like a good example of this being the so-called independent, strong, independent, single mom who is on welfare. You're not strong and independent if you're on welfare.
Oh, even if you're not on welfare, if you're taking a daycare subsidy or, food stamps or...
And that's all welfare to me. If it's a payment coming from the government, and it's not because you are disabled, you're an able-bodied person who is receiving a payment from the government for your life expenses because you can't or don't earn it yourself, that's welfare.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I when I was still single, after I divorced, I had my 3 kids. I actually got notices from the government of Alberta letting me know repeatedly that I was eligible to sign up for a program where I could get free dental care for my kids. And I never signed up because, I knew that I could afford dental care for my kids. It's not pleasant to have to pay that kind of money, but I can afford it. Why would I sign up for something that I don't need?
Yeah, I did the same thing with food stamps. That when we didn't need that and we were still eligible, we didn't take food stamps. The thing is, when you have that dependence, you give the government the ability to order you around. You can be called in and told you have to produce documentation. You can be told that you have to, in the United States at least, you could be told that you have to work at Goodwill for a certain number of hours a month. And even told to work in churches. So, this is not independence. This is not liberty. And the left is pushing for more and more of that. They're not really just pushing for liberty for women as a resource. They're pushing for, I don't want to call it privilege because I don't really consider being dependent on someone else a privilege. They're pushing for immaturity. They're pushing for
dependency.
Yeah, dependency. And it's not good. It might feel good because human beings, like any other animal, are fundamentally lazy. And if we are given an easy way to do things, we'll take it most of the time. If we don't think about it, we'll take it. Most animals will do that. We're not the only ones. That's why pets get fat, and because they're overfed and they don't have to hunt for their food. And that's why people get fat. We overfeed ourselves. We don't have to struggle, And this, I hate calling it liberty. It's not liberty. Liberty, you do not have liberty if you are not responsible for yourself and you are not accountable for your choices.
Okay, I can agree with that. But I do want to say, you know, essentially, like the whole thing with feminism right from the very beginning was, feminists wanted for women the same freedoms men had, but to keep the same protection and provisioning that women had always enjoyed. So they wanted the advantages of being men without the disadvantages, and they wanted to maintain the obligations of men without actually providing them with any reciprocal benefits, right? Which is why you see the difference, you know, when you had prior, you know, when the nuclear family and actual monogamous marriage for life was a thing. You know, it was a contract between two people to trade, each of them to bargain, trade, put something of value to the other on the table, and they would negotiate, and they would say, okay, this is the deal that I want, and they, you know, whereas now it's like women can just have the government extract the man's obligation from him against his will, and she doesn't have to pick up his dirty socks. She doesn't have to put up with him farting in bed. She doesn't have to, like, you know, rub his shoulders when he comes home from work. Nothing. Because he's not even living with her. He's across town and the government's garnishing his checks. Right? And that was the contract that she signed with him by opening her legs. That's essentially what that is now. And that gives women lots and lots and lots of freedom to do whatever they want. To not have to pick up dirty socks, to not have to deal with someone who farts in bed, and it essentially extracts the exact same obligation from the man, just without providing him any reciprocal benefit.
All right, so I want to continue with the video, but again, just to reiterate what Alison is saying, think of the left and the right as a mountain climber and an anchor, because as the left pushes for progress, and that's like their whole thing. At least, like I'm gonna be as charitable as possible to both sides here. Okay, the idea is the left pushes forward, so they look at things like marriage equality and so on, and they push for that. The right acts like the brakes, when that, not necessarily to say that they are against it, but they believe in slow progress. And the left is like in a hurry. They want it now, right? So you need both to keep things moving slowly. But what that means is that a right-wing guy today is nothing like a right-wing guy from 50 years ago in terms of the values and their beliefs. The only thing that is the same is that they believe in, you know, being really overly sort of cautious in how they do things and moving slowly.
I would prefer to describe them not necessarily as right-wing, left-wing, but as progressive and conservative.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, because I think right-wing and left-wing don't necessarily encompass... I think left-wing can be very regressive in some of their views, and the right-wing can be downright progressive in some of their views, at this point. But at least in terms of individual rights and freedom of expression and freedom from government intervention and things like that.
That's fair.
Yeah, the progressives want to push society forward, and conservatives want to slow that down. I don't think that they necessarily want to stop that, but I think that they are more careful in terms of throwing cultural institutions away without necessarily knowing what functions that they
right. And they
actually
want to,
right?
Yeah, they want to make sure that this is, you know, like actually a good idea. And this is, again,
before we actually fucking throw it in the trash.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Before we throw it in the trash or before we implement it. Because the thing is, I think that what a lot of progressives don't realize is that once you put, or maybe they do and they don't care, once you put something into law, now you have basically backed this belief with the force of the state. And that means that you have to be very careful about what you put in the hands of the state to control. And I think that that's why this usually plays out this way. And inevitably, over time, the conservatives do allow this thing to be. at least again,
Well, I mean,
in the abstract.
I think too, well, I think essentially that the conservatives, even if they wanted to roll things back, they would not be able to do that.
Right.
Because people eventually become accustomed to how the new normal, and they don't want to roll things back. But essentially, what we have, it's not just a matter of things going into law and all of that, and giving power to the state to enforce that. It is about the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And that all you can do when you're in government is you identify a problem, and let's say it's poverty, right? And you decide that you want to tackle that problem, and so you decide you're going to implement a program to tackle poverty. Now, you're not even going to know whether your solution actually worked or whether it made the problem worse for another 20 years or so, minimum, right? You're not even going to know that, right? And if it didn't work, if it indeed made things worse, right? By the time you realize that, by the time you identify that it was your program of fighting poverty that actually worsened poverty, now you have way more poor people, and the problem is even bigger than it was when you implemented your solution, right? And so, essentially, I think this more than anything is what conservative caution is about, is that these sort of drastic changes in, especially if they're top-down changes. I mean, like, I don't think conservatives have any problem with, churches running soup kitchens and things like that. Like, I don't think that they have any problem with charity, and I especially don't think that, because they give more money of their disposable income to charity than liberals do, right? Than progressives do. But I think that they have an issue with mandating certain things from the top down and this kind of social engineering, because governments don't have the best track record of predicting the outcomes of what are well-intentioned policies.
Right.
Well, this is something that actually has hundreds of years of history to it. It actually goes back before the United States. It's a beyond the United States kind of thing. This goes back to the UK, and it's the fact that governments don't have a great track record in this. If you read about the dissolution of the monasteries, read about the old poor laws in England and how they came about, and then this is basically the difference between an outlook that relies on a level of independence. And independence, the way I described it, where there's personal accountability and responsibility, because you really don't have independence if you are not accountable and responsible. And the elite belief that there's some people who are smarter and better than everybody else, and it's their job to herd the rest of the human population. And no, I'm not blaming the people of the UK. I'm blaming the elites for this. This is something that, when the state took over charitable institutions, essentially, because it used to be that it was the church that assisted the poor, and they had their way of doing it, and they had their way of striving to help people take care of themselves, and so on. And when the state took that over, if you go back and read about the old poor laws, and I don't have a link handy right now because I didn't think I was going to have to talk about this, but if you look back at the old poor laws, they started having to do the same things and very similar things to what the Republicans said they were trying to do during the second Bush administration, when they signed a contract for America and enacted what they called welfare reform, which they really fucked up big time. It was a mess. What they wrote and what they passed turned out to be a mess. But the state,
probably because they had to compromise on a lot of things.
Well, they did have to compromise on a lot of things, but there are other things that they did that were not. If I had the links that I have looked up, I could explain this better. But there were things that they did that were not going to work. In any case, the bottom line is the state started to having to tell people, no, you can't refuse to work and rely on welfare because you don't like what you would get paid if you worked. No, you can't move from province to province and gouge people. And this was all after the plague took out, like I think it was 2/3 of the population of Europe. There was all sorts of shit going on that they had to deal with. As soon as the state starts trying to control that stuff, they have to micromanage. Whereas if they leave it to the people and to the church, to where the church isn't going to form a welfare state like that, because they can't. Their money, they don't have the power to tax. Their money is given voluntarily. People come in and tithe, and if they don't have the money, they don't tithe. If they don't want to tithe, they don't tithe. When it's a voluntary thing, when it's charitable donations like that, you can't just have people sitting back and taking and taking and taking. People end up having to live on their own. They end up having to strive. They end up having to struggle and support each other and live as a community. So this is what we end up with, this situation like we have today, where the state is now trying to micromanage everything about the employee-employee relationship, about human earning capacity, about human working capacity, and everything, because they're trying to herd people, and they're trying to provide for too many people, and they're trying to create the perfect welfare system, and you can't. It's impossible to create a perfect state-run welfare system.
All right. Thanks for that. I've got to move on, so I'm going to hit the play button.
As we ritually rebel and throw off tyranny, it's almost like we've triumphed over it, except we haven't. We just get the pretense of throwing off the yoke and sticking it to our leaders. We get a feast of fools. I'm going to offer a prediction here. The U.S.'s current Republican government will reverse none of the previous government's push towards greater female protectionism and liberty at the expense of non-women. The Lilly Ledbeater Act, the Dear Colleague letter, the enthusiastic consent standard, Title IX, erosions in due process for those accused of rape, VAWA, nope, it will all stand. And when the resource producers have had a bit of a break, the left will get back in the cab and start driving the U.S. towards its newest moral goal.
Wait.
All right, I paused it. I was just going to say, go ahead.
I do want to say that the Republicans actually did roll back. They didn't roll back portions of VAWA, but when it came up for reauthorization, they actually did manage to get some of the language in some of the passages in VAWA ungendered, degendered, and allow some of the protections of VAWA to extend towards male victims. They did that. They largely did it. They largely got away with doing it because LGBT groups were pushing for that. They were pushing for that against a ton of feminist pushback. I was at the National Organization for Women conference, sitting in on a panel discussion where a lesbian activist was essentially frozen out of the room for saying gendered language in this bill, in this piece of legislation, does not serve my community. The language of male perpetrators and female victims does not serve same-sex couples. And so I want you to think about changing it. And the looks, these, it was a room of about 75 women, and they all looked like they'd been forced to eat bird poo, right? Listening to her, right? How dare you suggest that we ungender the language? This is a bad bill. There's this Republican bill, right? So they did actually manage to get something done there. But yeah, they didn't get rid of VAWA altogether. They have not gotten rid of the Duluth model, all of those things, right? They haven't essentially outlawed the Duluth model in any of the jurisdictions. I think there's 35 states that are compelled to use it in the United States, and most other counties use it, even if they're not compelled to. Mm-hmm. So
Title IX hasn't changed.
He's right, but I got to give a little bit of credit where it's due.
Well, and the thing to keep in mind is that the Republican Party, and in the United States, that specific conservatism it goes hand in hand with traditionalism. And it's the traditionalism where the father is the husband and father is the responsible person in the relationship. Not that the mother isn't responsible for things, but where it's gynocentric. I'm just going to flat out say it. It's gynocentric. Conservatism is still gynocentric. Make no mistake, both parties are like that. And so they're going to still feel compelled to offer women greater protections than they offer men. They're going to still feel compelled to treat women as if we're angels. And it actually takes a woman doing a lot worse to be treated as anything but an angel than for a man to be treated as anything but an angel. And that's we have to be aware of that when we're dealing with this, because at some point our activism has to expand into lobbying to neutralize the language in laws so that it is gender neutral, so that human rights are equally protected, and equal accountability under the law does happen. And in order to do that, we have to be able to speak the language of both parties, because they're in there and they're the people that we got to deal with. And we aren't going to be able to change that unless we kick both parties out and go full libertarian. And I don't see that happening anytime soon, even though it should.
I was going to say about libertarianism, which is something Alison and I talked about when I was up there at the Badger Cave, and we were sort of like, she was running this idea that inspired her to make these videos by me. And she was asking, like, if... and I know we're going to get to the Church of Women Worsting in a little bit, but essentially the left drives the church. They're at the top because they set the moral precedent, and the left does that, and the right works within it. And she's like, well, what about the libertarians? And I was like, well, I would say the libertarians probably don't operate within that framework. However, that's probably one of the reasons why they're really unpopular, because they don't have... I don't know of anything about libertarianism that is constructed specifically to appeal to women's sensibilities. And then speaking about women as a whole, and libertarianism is unpopular with women, and maybe it has to do with that whole, freedom versus security thing, whereas women tend to value security more. More security means more state, and, even if the right offers less state, they offer way more state than what libertarians want. So when you see somebody like, I believe, Karen, you are more libertarian, I'm assuming.
I'm pretty much for like teeny tiny government. I go with the Roman model of roads, infrastructure, national defense, trade, and public health.
Gotta have them roads. And like Julie Borowski, who we've had on before as a libertarian girl. And, we're talking, but these are like diamonds, like they're super rare. And so if libertarianism can't attract a large number of females, then it will probably be small for a long time.
It will always be small.
Yeah, it will always be small. Because when libertarianism, if it ever does attract a bunch of women, guess what's going to happen after that? It's going to attract a bunch of men.
Here's the thing.
Here's the thing on libertarianism. It's not that libertarianism is or is not gynocentric. It doesn't really have a position on that. It's not about who deserves the most protection or who deserves the least protection or who to provide for anything. It's about how to go about it. And libertarianism is essentially the theory that government is not as good at taking care of individual needs and small groups like your family and your local community as the individuals themselves are. That's all it is. So even in libertarianism, gynocentrism could still end up being the order of the day.
Well, this is
the thing that the society would benefit from is the lack of authoritarian social micromanagement, which gynocentrism would eliminate a great deal of that authoritarian social micromanagement that you get with the left, the total left, and the total right.
Well, because I sat on a panel at the Wisconsin State Libertarian Party convention with Amanda Billyrock, and the panel question essentially was why are there so few female libertarians? How can we get more female libertarians? And when the question was posed, how do we get more female libertarians? What I said was, you don't want to. Because the moment that you do, you will lose your libertarianism. There is going to be a small percentage of women who value liberty over security, who value freedom over safety, right? Those women are already here. And if you go and actively recruit women based on, oh, this cool libertarian thing, it's like this cool social movement, it's great, come on in, what you're going to get is you're going to get a watering down of your values, because women in your own movement will begin to demand safety and begin to demand that you prioritize safety and security over freedom and liberty. That is what will happen. I guarantee it, right? Here's the personality freaking research that proves it, right? Like, most men aren't libertarians, right? Mm-hmm. And men are more likely to value freedom. They're more likely to calculate the freedom versus safety metric, right? Much more towards the freedom end than women are, right? And most men aren't libertarians, right? So what makes you think that women are going to join your group in droves and not irreversibly change it?
If you look at the history of women as a voting bloc, and women have to a degree been a voting bloc in the United States since we got the vote. If you look at how women have voted just in the United States over the last 100 years, it has been almost entirely for government programs to serve women, and government control over families, and government control over small business and large business communities, everything it's been for authoritarian social micromanagement.
Yeah, no,
you think about the way girls and women are from early childhood.
Tattling.
Yes, that's the thing I was about to bring up. And this is something that was brought home to me as a little kid reading Beverly Cleary novels. The book about Ramona Quimby when she was in the first grade. And I noticed when I was reading the book, the first grade teacher had to tell the girls, not the boys, the girls, nobody likes a tattletale. And it was all about the girls' behavior. The book was all about the girls' behavior at that point in time. And it's a common thing.
Yeah, whereas the boys were all like in A Christmas Story when the dude stuck his tongue to the freaking flagpole.
Double dog dare ya.
Stuck.
Yeah.
Nobody tells. Nobody here is a rat fink.
The teacher has to go out and find him. And the kid doesn't talk about being bullied either. He doesn't tell his parents. He ends up duking it out with the bully. This is the difference between how boys and girls handle things. If you want that to change, if you're a dad out there, if you're a mom out there, if you want that to change, raise your daughters to take responsibility for themselves. When they come and tattle to you, tell them to deal with it, unless they are in immediate, serious danger. If someone's picking on them, if someone's giving them the third degree, if they don't like something about their room or whatever, if they see somebody disobeying a rule and it's not impacting on them and they come tell them to deal with it. Don't encourage that kind of stuff. Tell them that this is bullshit. You don't have to use that word, but don't tolerate that. You train them from the time they're little kids. And if we can teach girls from when they're young that is not tolerated, and that it is their job to be responsible for themselves, and to let other people be responsible for themselves, We might eliminate a lot of problems in society that exist today. The epidemic of malicious prosecution, and I will call it an epidemic, because nobody should know 3 different men who have endured multiple year ordeals of vexatious litigation and malicious prosecution over a custody battle.
Yeah.
I do. I know 3 different men who have gone through several years of being repeatedly falsely accused by their ex-wives or ex-girlfriends, and they're using that as a tool in a custody battle with impunity.
Oh, you want to hear a story?
No, we got to go on with the video.
No. Very, very briefly. Very
All
briefly.
right.
Well, let me just say,
I got a
my
phone
point
call.
is that has to be eliminated.
It does.
Teach your daughters teach your daughters not to depend on authority figures to micromanage the rest of society to suit their sensibilities.
Here's
Teach
the
them that
fucking
their
thing.
sensibilities should not rule their lives and are not allowed to rule everybody else's lives.
But here's the thing, though, is that the entire system is going the other way. The entire, like, when my son came home all excited and all thrilled, right, because he got into a brawl, right? He was in grade 3, and I'm like, why are you late? And he's like, I had detention. And I'm like, okay, what for? And he's like, I got into a brawl. And I'm like, cool. What was it? And he's like, there were these guys and they were picking on my friend and they were pushing him around and stuff. And then I just jumped in there and it started swinging. And then I accidentally kicked my friend in the nuts. And I was like, okay, sorry for your friend. And then he says, you got to sign all this stuff, right? And it was this thing that we had to go through together. What did you do wrong? What will you do next time? And I had to tell him all the proper answers to give. What did you do wrong? You jumped in and helped your friend. You jumped into it, right? What will you do? No, next time I will definitely go and get an adult to sort it all out, right? And so essentially we're training people, we're training boys, right, to tattle. We're training boys to be like girls, to engage the system instead of running into the burning building, instead of grabbing the guy off the subway tracks, instead of doing any of those things, they're just going to freeze and scream, help, somebody who's authorized to do this needs to do it.
Yeah.
It's exactly the opposite of what we need to teach our kids to do.
That's terrifying.
What's going to happen? We have a disaster, So the next Hurricane Sandy, the next generation's Hurricane Sandy. Everybody's going to wait for the state to come in and tell them whether or not they need to shutter their windows, whether or not they need to get out of their house. The water will be up to the 2nd story, and they'll be sitting there going, "What should I do?" We are regressing.
Yeah.
We are regressing terribly.
And
the pioneers that conquered the West would be disgusted with modern Americans. They'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you wussy-ass Americans? What happened to this country?
Honestly, we need a system. We need a system that's balanced. We don't need every single human being, right, to run into the burning building. We need some people who will freeze and scream for help. We need some people who will leap to action, right? But we
also need people to be smart enough to know that when the fire alarm gets off, you don't wait for a fireman to come in and get you. You get off your ass and you go out. You leave because the building's on fire. We don't have that now. We have this idea that you go tell an adult.
Yeah, well, what we need is we need both things, and what we're trying to do with our kids these days is turn them all into this one thing, this helpless person that cannot mediate any conflict, cannot resolve any disagreement without intervention from an authority figure. Right. That is fucked right up.
All right.
But I want to point something else, one minor thing out also, because VAWA was brought up and it was mentioned that the Republicans had rolled back some language. I want to point something out. From 1978 through 1994, feminists had a 16-year battle to get gendered federal violence law, domestic violence law. They lied to Congress in 1978 in hearings trying to get laws passed. By 1994, 1984, we had federal domestic violence law. It was called the Family Violence Services and Protection Act of 1984. Ronald Reagan signed it into law. It established shelters. It established that family violence was still violence, and that if somebody filed a complaint, that the cops dealt with it as an assault complaint, not just some problem that stayed in the house that they didn't have to deal with, and so on. And this was, and it wasn't as though domestic violence was ignored before that. It wasn't. If you look it up on, oh shoot, I can't think of the name of the blog. The Unknown History of Misandry is the name of the blog. There are news stories about judges that wanted to bring back the whipping post for wife beaters.
There were judges.
This is not story time. I have a point here. That the fact that they strove to make it gender specific rather than gender neutral for 10 years after the thing they said they wanted was established. After the thing that they said they wanted, they fought to make sure it was taken away from men. That is why they shouted down the lesbians at the feminist conference that you were at. That is why. Because they fought to take gender neutrality out of it. And they sure as shit didn't want to see it put back in.
Yeah, no, they absolutely didn't. And, honestly, I still remember reading one story from, like, the late 1800s where the judge gave the wife the option. Do you want to wield the whip, or do you want the sheriff to do it, right? And I understand that this is a difficult decision because your arm is likely not as strong and likely not going to be able to inflict the same level of punishment on your husband as the sheriffs would, but that it would give you a certain satisfaction to be the one to actually whip him.
Okay, moving on.
But that was back before anybody took domestic violence seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Newest way of saving and freeing women simultaneously. The Republicans don't oppose the Democrats, or rather the right doesn't oppose the left. In fact, without the right, the left would likely end up being ousted in a true civil war because the populace would never get that needed break that compels them to endure. When you believe social progress is judged by the liberty of women, in order to make social progress, you have to be constantly liberating women. In order to constantly liberate women, women must be seen to always be in chains. Women worsting. Therefore, women always have it worse than men and are always needing to be saved from oppression. It doesn't matter the actual situation of women, women are always worse off and always needing to be saved. If that wasn't so, our society would enter a state of moral decay. Like sharks who need to keep swimming to breathe, we must keep saving women. Or, I don't know, I guess we all shed our human skins and become lizard people or something. Anyway, let's get on with the anatomy lesson. Churches form around unquestioned beliefs. Women worsting is an unquestioned belief. We can't question it because if we do, we're horrible misogynists. So let's start talking about the anatomy of the church that's formed around the unquestioned belief in women worsting. Oh, wait, just a second. The first important anatomical lesson is that the church is divided into two sects. Right here's, over there's.
All right, just to explain right here and over there. That was something that Alison and I had talked about. To put it really simply, one of the reasons why the Democrats tend to do better, or at least, like up until very recently, is with women is by their use of threat narratives that as opposed to the way the right does it. And the way that the left, or the way the right does women worsting, is they look at cultures in the foreign. They look at the tribe outside of where we are, and they say, the men over there are the problem. They're coming for you, they're going to rape you, they're going to kill your kids, they're going to eat them, whatever. They're savages. But specifically, it's the men over there. You can use the Middle East as an example. The terrorist attacks, the rape gangs, etc., and so on. Whether or not it's actually true is irrelevant. The point is that the right's narrative to get people motivated to put them in positions to protect women is that narrative of the men over there are the bad ones, the men over here are the good ones. The left does the opposite of that. They're the ones that say, no. Those men over there, if you oppose them, you're racist. There's something wrong with you. That's their culture. It's not like ours. It's just different. You have to accept them for who they are because everybody is equal. However, the men in this country are the ones that are the problem. They're as bad, if not far, far worse than the ones over there. But the difference is that threat is immediate because the men are right here. That's why they talk about rape culture. That's why they talk about, white privilege, male privilege, etc. In the patriarchy, it's basically the evils that are here right now in our very, lives, as opposed to the ones that are far away and you can't really see them and they're far removed and they're not likely to come over here. So it tends to be more effective, or at least that is the idea. So this is just to explain what we were talking about, because she just said right here's and over there's, and she didn't really go into it.
Yeah, no, but that's actually, it's extremely pertinent. Yep.
That's kind of interesting because really what you guys are describing is that the left makes the progressive stack, the top of the progressive stack, their in-group. And so they treat external groups that the right treats as external groups, the left treats as part of their in-group. And groups that the right treats as their in-group, the left treats as their out-group. And to a degree, the left treats all men as their out-group.
Mm-hmm.
And to a degree that's maybe less visible, the right does it as well.
Well, I think that the right or conservatives have a more healthy view of men than progressives do. Conservatives at least can consider the idea that there is something good about men.
They value what the left basically says men should be required to do this. The right says it's valuable when men do this.
Yeah, no, the right says they're already doing it. They've always done it, and we actually value the fact that men do this.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas the left is like, men need to do this, and they're not doing it.
They don't deserve appreciation for it.
Yeah, no,
This is
or
just
respect,
what's expected,
Or respect, or even consideration for what they need, the conditions they need in order to do it effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to continue. I just wanted to explain that bit.
Women have it worse right here, or women have it worse over there. If you've paid close attention so far, you might notice that the sect of right here is approximately equivalent to the regressive left and feminism. The democratic curia exists comfortably within this sect. This sect also rules the Church of Women Worsting for one simple reason.
All right. I've already explained that bit, so I just skipped it.
The reason why the right here sect rules is because there is nothing to compete with the immediacy of women being in horrible danger right where you are, right where you live, right now. I'll stop here to remind you that the ruling Church of Women Worsting controls the steering wheel of society's moral direction. While the right may not control the steering wheel, it does control the engine, which means it can slow progress down or stop it briefly for servicing. It just can't change course. In fact, the only way the sect of right over there could gain control and the sect of right here lose control is with a ground war with a credible military threat. Then fear of men over there could eclipse the immediacy of fearing the men right here.
All right. Yeah, that was the one thing I was thinking, that usually when we're at war, all of a sudden we value the men over here.
Oh yeah, no, just anybody who wants, and anybody who thinks that we used to treat our veterans real well and our soldiers, we used to treat them so nice, and now we've just started treating them shitty. They need to go read the poem Tommy by Rudyard Kipling, Tommy Atkins, that soldiers when there was a war going on. Yeah, you're a hero. Yeah, free drinks for you. Oh, you're welcome anywhere, blah, blah, blah. When there wasn't a war going on, it's like, yeah, no, we don't serve your kind in here. Get lost.
Now, what changed was during the Vietnam era. The Vietnam era, when American media began demonizing the soldiers during the war. And while previously, during wartime, for the most part, soldiers were valued. Now, this is something I didn't realize until my father showed me an old movie, and I can't remember the title of the movie, which is awful. But I watched scenes of a guy who had come back, I think, from World War I, while the war was still going on, to hear people crabbing at him about why America shouldn't be involved in the war. So it's not new that controversy affects how individuals within the community treat the soldiers. You know, they haven't necessarily always been considered gods, and patriotism didn't necessarily mean not questioning what the military was doing. But the degree of demonization faced by Vietnam veterans was abhorrent and shameful. What people did at that time was absolutely shameful.
Yeah.
Because these were men who were forced at jail point, or at the point of having to leave their homeland to go and fight. And like, they were basically rounded up by the draft and given 6 weeks training that didn't actually give them enough understanding of what they needed to do to not go over there and die, and sent into war, and affected by chemicals and, you know, everything that happens in the war zone, combat, being kidnapped, being tortured, everything that happened in Vietnam. And then they came back, and people called them baby killers and spit on them in the street. You know,
Yeah,
so,
that was a little, and they were doing it while the war was still going on. There was absolutely, there was no, there's no sense.
Respect.
Well, and I think part of that was that there was no sense, in terms of like, the public was just like, why are we even involved in this? Like, not only like, why would we send a volunteer army over there, let alone draft people,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. But they took it out on the people who had absolutely no choice in the matter.
It would be like if during the Civil War,
his mother beats him.
it would be like if during the Civil War, Northerners who opposed slavery condemned slaves for putting up with being slaves. Because that's basically what they did to the soldiers during the Vietnam War. You had two groups of draftees during the Vietnam War. You had those who obeyed their government and obeyed the law and did what they were told, either because they were afraid of going to jail, because they didn't have the means to get out of the country, for whatever reason. When they were called, they obeyed. And you had those who either were conscientious objectors or who fled the country to avoid fighting the war. And nobody really has the right to lay blame on those who did what they were told, you know, until you walk in their shoes. But that's what everybody did.
Yeah. Well, and they, you know, like, and we never really treated our veterans extremely well, but we, you know, like, honestly, that was the Vietnam was the impetus. It was so embarrassing. The public response to that was so embarrassing. And then on top of that, it was, you know, like, you had these 18, 19-year-old boys who were coming home with their limbs blown off, right, and didn't even have the fucking right to vote, right? And all of a sudden, the government's like, okay, maybe we need to lower the voting age to 18, right, since men are inductable, forcibly inductable at age 18. And then they lowered it for everybody, including women, even though women have never been subject to the draft, right?
And all of the people that bitched and moaned about these soldiers continued to vote for the same two parties that put them in that situation to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Moving
so
on.
who was really to blame there?
Yeah, well, All right, moving on.
And that would be because of the threat to not just our women, but also our resources. Until that happens, the sect of right here steers the show. On the top is the democratic curia. Or perhaps a better term is the liberal curia. They dominate the steering wheel, the direction of our society, since they control the moral imperative of women worsting. Although they are technically liberals, they don't represent classical liberals or any left-leaning people who don't believe morality should be judged on women's liberty and women's liberty alone. Below them is the priesthood. The academia is responsible for legitimizing the curia by finding new strands of women worsting for them to target. And also below them are the preachers, the media tasked with spreading the good word of always save the girl. Surrounding the priesthood are the zealots, who graduate from the church's education. They repeat the church's dogma by rote and do violence to those who question it. The church encouraged their emotional immaturity and dependency to preserve their black and white thinking. The zealots particularly dislike gamergaters and men's rights advocates. Men's rights advocates for questioning the priesthood, and gamergaters for questioning the preachers. There are two factions within the right here zealots. The first faction is the yes over there, but right here faction. They recognize women worsting over there, but they are far more concerned with women worst over here. This faction is generally seen in the more political arena because while it wants to keep its moral dominance over the Western rabble, it does enjoy moral dominance over the rest of the world as well. This faction is the old left, and the power of the yes over there but right here, or old left faction, is waning a bit because there is a second faction of the right heres, and it is the strict right here faction. They're otherwise termed.
Go ahead.
They're otherwise termed intersectional.
I don't know. I think she's gonna say SJWs.
I think she's gonna say intersectional.
All right, let's find out. I want to see what she says first.
The regressive left. They don't
Yeah. The
regressive left is essentially both SJW and intersectional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's those three terms can be, to a degree, those three terms can be interchangeable.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I'm actually really liking how she's sort of breaking this all down. I think this is, yeah.
Yeah, this is more thought out than it was when we were doing it when I was up there, so. All right, moving on.
Recognize the situation over there, or they find it particularly expedient not to care. An example of a strict right here faction are intersectional feminists and those who regard Sharia law as feminist. This requires a bit of an explanation. According to intersectionality, Muslim men are tremendously disadvantaged by the wealthy white men who control the West. Intersectionality allows feminist women in the West to use the plight of Muslim men as a way of shaming their targets, the wealthy Western white men whose power they want to control, into compliance. However, the situation for Muslim women becomes problematic because it paints Western men in a better light than Muslim men. Enter the mental gymnastics to erase Muslim women's lack of equal rights. Abracadabra! Sharia law is feminist, and the situation in the Middle East is rendered useful as a tool of social control of white Western men. This is why intersectionality exists. It doesn't exist because of who it purports to help, but who it has the ability to exert moral dominance over. Men, in particular white men, but in general all men.
You guys follow that okay?
Oh, fuck. I'm wishing I had actually watched this before tonight's show, because, because, like, I decided, cause since I hadn't had time to watch it, that I was gonna, like, leave it until, and we would just
do a real reaction.
She's really fucking blowing this out of the water. Like, this is actually really, I know I said I was gonna, rub my e-peen all over her face. during this Rantzerker where I was,
It's really good. It's really good. It starts out as like, Allison, what is all this cringe at first with all this leaving MRM, and then you're like, oh, that's what you're doing. Oh my god, mind blown. Fuck you for being so good, Allison.
yeah, yeah, no, there's a reason why she is the thin edge of the wedge, the thin end of the wedge, in terms of breaking through these ideas and getting them, at least writing them down, getting people to look at them and think about them. It's why she's so esoteric. And
all right, so do you get how she's saying that the regressives are basically like saying that Sharia law is feminism?
oh yeah, no, I read an article like last week that was like Muhammad was the first feminist.
Yeah,
or the first
actually,
male feminist.
I saw that as a meme. People were saying it in chat. Muhammad was a feminist, and I was like, I haven't given this thought yet, but I feel like if I do,
honestly, I mean, he was in some respects, right? Like he did take a situation that was absolute shit, right? And he imposed a set of laws, many of which protected the rights of women, right? He did that, right? Including the right of women to divorce, including the right of women to own property, run businesses, and things like that, right? He did that. But, I mean, you can't say that Sharia, in terms of what Muhammad did back then, and then you impose it on people now and say that that's actually not a step backward.
right?
Right,
Well,
you can't say he's feminist by our standards. Hammurabi was feminist by our standards, or by the standards back then, right? Like any freaking government that had any regime that had a provision where people could free their slaves and make them free people, right, was progressive compared to ones that didn't, right?
mm-hmm.
You allow the slave owner to say, okay, when I die, you're going to be free. Yeah, that was progressive back then, right? Or that restricted slavery to 7 years, and then the slave would be made free, right? That was progressive back then compared to other societies that, where slaves were owned for life and their offspring were owned, and, so I mean, but, it's, Sharia is not feminist compared to Western values today. It is not. It is not.
No.
Muhammad might have brought in gains for women 1,500 years ago or 1,400 years ago or whatever, but if we implemented Sharia right now, it would be a huge step back for everybody, including women.
Yeah.
So what you have to understand about feminism is people seem to think that feminism is a fight for women's rights. That's a big mistake, a huge mistake. Feminism is an exploitation of society's gynocentric attitudes for political power and financial gain. And so they are constantly fighting for changes, but not necessarily genuine progress. In the 19th century, women fought to get out of the coal mines, that it was too hard for them to do that job, that they shouldn't have to be subjected to that they were working naked in certain areas of the coal mines, and that it was just an abomination. And in the 20th century, women fought to be considered equally capable of working in coal mines. That's the way feminism works. It doesn't have anything to do with rights. It has everything to do with political power and everything to do with financial gain.
Yep.
And feminist organizations will fight for whatever gets them that financial gain and that political power, which is why today feminism is about fighting the terrible oppressive epidemic of manspreading.
Right.
They've run out of things that people don't remember them fighting for, that they can't reverse themselves on yet. and are now fighting superficial, stupid little battles like that.
Oh man, I was listening to CBC Radio. Okay, Edmonton, this Good Morning Edmonton or whatever the fuck it's called. It's like the 2-hour morning commute program on CBC Radio 1. I'm listening to it this morning, and they're talking about mansplaining, right? It's like as if it's a serious fucking issue.
I saw
as
that.
if it's a serious fucking problem. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, we're off topic. I want to continue, but I saw a thing on a YouTube channel that I really like called RSA, and there was an interview with a woman, and the first word out of her mouth is mansplaining, and I'm like, what the fuck? This is supposed to be like a smart channel. Anyway, so yeah, no, this is like, there are politicians using that term now, so whatever. Moving on.
Men are both the body of the car and the fuel.
Go ahead.
My point with what I was basically saying was that any system under which women worsting can be used and gynocentric attitudes can be exploited to gain political power and financial gain, any system like that can be considered feminist.
Okay. All right.
General all men. Men are both the body of the car and the fuel in its engine. It is critically important for the church to exert moral dominance over men because otherwise it might lose the ability to dictate the moral course of society. Intersectionality serves to delegitimize and justify marginalizing the issues of black, Asian, and poor men while exerting tremendous moral force on wealthy white men. It's thus the perfect tool of control. It reduces minority and class issues down to those that are relevant to feminist women and enables them to ignore those men who are not useful and dominate those men who are. Regardless of the cost to the minority and poor communities feminists exploit in extracting their moral capital. The usefulness of this is why intersectionality is gaining traction in the church, although it does have one possibly unintended side effect, because it's creating a separate faction in the over theirs. The old right are lax over theirs. They are, yes, right here, but over there. In other words, they recognize the men in our society are oppressive, but they want to focus on what they perceive as more of a threat. Men over there who might rape and abuse our women and take our resources. You'll notice that the old right generally agrees with women worsting in our society along with the old left. However, there's currently a faction in the over theirs that is growing in relation to the strict right heres. What the liberals term alt-right. They are strict over theirs. In other words, they disbelieve that the men they have personal experience with are a problem. But they do believe that those men they don't have personal experience with are a problem. For them, women worst is solely a problem over there. This faction exists as a reaction to the strict right heres, the new left's moral overreach, just as the right is a reaction to the left's financial overreach. And just like the old right can agree with church orthodoxy without particularly enjoying tithing to the church and complaining about the church's spendthrift ways, the strict over theirs can agree with the orthodoxy without particularly enjoying the church's authoritarian control over their life or its attempt to exert authoritarian control. The strict over theirs, in fact, don't oppose the church orthodoxy for rational or principled reasons. They don't oppose it because the orthodoxy prevents questioning or because it's exploitative towards men and women, both. They oppose it because they think the zealots are stupid and they want to laugh at them. They oppose it because they want to feel superior to the structure that rules it. They oppose it because they don't like the control it exerts over their lives. But ultimately, the strict over theirs don't oppose the church at all.
I just want to add to that. She does say that about the alt-right, but that also applies, I think, to people who would not consider themselves to be alt-right, but do spend a lot of time online criticizing the progressives while still existing within the church, which are usually like most people that, I hate to say it this way, but I think it's true, most people in the skeptic community that attack SJWs on YouTube, or when I say attack, I mean pwn or whatever, they still persist that there is, they still do so within the confines, within this framework.
This includes people like Sargon, it includes people like Steven Crowder, it includes people like Sam Harris.
Skeptic.
It includes people like Christopher Hitchens,
Mm-hmm.
blessed be his soul, that it is that they use the foil of institutionalized systemic pervasive misogyny in order to argue against Islam. There are so many arguments that are much more rational, right, but less emotionally appealing, right,
Yeah.
that you could use to undermine Islam as an ideology. And yet every single one of them, these people that I greatly admire, I get along with, Dave Rubin, right, they will, it's the go-to, it's the first thing, how they treat women, how the Muslims treat women. It is the very first thing that they will bring up. And if you even suggest that they're not getting the whole picture, right, it makes them very uncomfortable. Some of them are more open to hearing you out, hearing your point of view, right? But even MRAs, even a lot of MRAs, even a lot of people who support the MRM, even a lot of people who believe, when I talk about early feminism, when I talk about first wave feminism, and I talk about questioning the idea that women were ever oppressed in the West, that they were ever actually, that we were ever actually a society built on misogyny, even people who buy the argument that I have put forward, that there is no society that could possibly exist where hatred, systemic hatred of women, is a core value, that it just could not, in terms of evolutionary pressures, could not exist, right? That they will agree with that, but then they will say, but except for there's this one exception that involves this 1.3 billion Muslims.
Right. All right. Cool. Yeah, no, that's true. Are you guys still there? Oh, yeah. Okay. You just.
I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm still here.
All right. Here we go.
This is why. If you say men outside of the church's control over there, or back then, were bad, if you say every man but the men under the church's control were bad or are bad, then you are supporting the church's control over men. Duh. If you say the women over there or back then are enslaved and only the women under the church rule are free, then you are also supporting the church's rule over women. Duh. Like a Republican win in the government is a release valve for ensuring the democratic or liberal curia continues to control the direction of our society, the fame and attention strict over theirs get, who oppose the right here zealots, is another form of release valve that only serves to support our continued subjugation.
Fuck! Yes!
You got, is that all?
No, it's just, all it is antagonism. All it is, you know, like, and the thing is, like, these men, right? These men, and they're wonderful, wonderful men. Steven Crowder, I like him. He's a great guy, right? Dave Rubin, great guy. Sargon, wonderful guy. Really, really like, but there is this thing in them that, and this thing in so many men that is just, there has to be a villain somewhere. And they cannot battle the strict, the strict left, the strict zealots, right, on the left, the strict women worsters over here, right? They cannot figure out a way to defend our men from this slander by some means other than a deflection to, yeah, no, it's not us, it's those guys over there, or it's those guys back then. Mm-hmm. That is essentially what it just if we just manage to, like, dodge the bullet and it hits some other guy, right, then we'll be seen as okay. We'll be seen as not dangerous, not misogynistic, not horrible, not evil, right? As long as the bullet hits some other guy, over there or back then. That seems to, and I think it's reflexive. I think it's instinctive, right?
Yeah, it's hard to shake. Mike is unmuted, so I think he's actually going to say something. But I was wrong. Go ahead, Karen. Oh no, wait, there he is.
There he is. I was. Mike?
No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh, I was wrong. Okay.
You just unmuted.
Well, now you have. You have said that you weren't going to say anything,
Of course.
which is something.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I have a headache tonight.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a sinus infection right now.
If you want...
Get on with it.
We'll get on with it. Go ahead. Karen, do you want to say anything else, or should I continue?
I was going to complain about my sinuses, but I don't need to.
Oh, okay. Well, you kind of just did. But okay, I'm going to hit play.
We laugh at the zealots and their antics. Post-Trump PTSD. I am literally shaking. And hug your minority friends, and on and on and on. Trump's win has upset all the right people. That's what's said. But what if it hasn't? The zealots currently rioting in the streets are idiots. Zealots make no sense outside of their context. They are insane or terminally stupid, but they make perfect sense if they're part of a larger structure. They exist to enforce the church's will by reducing everything down to black and white and red. Red for those flags that make them charge like bulls at whatever's triggering them. And the media threw a red flag on Trump. But what if that's the point? But what if they're also here to make us think that something's changed when it hasn't? What if they're a diversionary tactic? If you look at Trump's policies, he's center-right, and that's being extremely generous. This election has basically been between a Democrat from back then versus a Democrat from right now. There's a reason why the Republican establishment doesn't like him. I'll remind you of the metaphor of the climber putting in an anchor so she only falls so far if she overreaches. The real difference politically, not ethically, politically, between Hillary and Trump has been the media. Specifically, the red flag the media threw on Trump, the demonization, the spurious claims of racism and sexism. Never before has the media been this biased against a Republican candidate, or this obviously so, all while excusing the malfeasance of the opposite candidate. Yet never before have two political candidates been so close on the actual issues.
I would agree with that. Trump is the most liberal Republican in existence, and he's pulled the Republican Party forward.
Oh yeah.
In terms of what progressives would see as progress, he's pulled them forward into cheering him when he says he will defend the rights and the safety of LGBTQ Americans, right? And he had a huge crowd of Republicans cheer him. Not jeer, cheer.
I would maintain that Trump ran under the Republican ticket only because it was to his advantage strategically to do so, and not because he actually is a Republican.
No,
I was going to say, he made statements of pro-Republican statements for years and years, but he's more of a Reagan Republican rather than, like, there were a lot of people from the Democrat Party that became Republican. My dad was one of them because of Ronald Reagan. They're called Reagan Democrats, and he had some similar things about him to Trump. There's a lot of parallels here, where he was more centrist than a lot of the left would like to call him, and Trump is very similar to that. But I think what happened here with Trump that a lot of people don't understand is that there was a huge disconnect between the Republican elite in Washington and the grassroots Republican,
The voter.
who really, a lot of the things that the Republican elite, was almost like they were on autopilot. We've been saying these things for 20 years, so if we just keep saying these things, our base will stick with us. And the base had changed significantly. Their social attitudes had changed significantly. And while they were with them on fiscal matters, they were not with them on social matters. And Trump figured that out, and the rest of the Republicans didn't. And that is part of why he rose to popularity. It's a large part of it.
And I would say too that I don't think Trump's comments about LGBTQ people were just like sort of a political ploy or anything like that. I think that his record since at least 2000 has been that he believed that they should be LGBTQ people should be protected by the 1964 U.S. Civil Rights Act. That there should be some kind of equivalent to marriage for same-sex couples. You don't necessarily need to call it marriage, but with all the same rights and privileges. That he would never have any problem hiring an LGBTQ person or appointing them to his cabinet if he made a run for the presidency. That he essentially is like, yeah, no, like, I care more about the content of somebody's character than who they stick their dick in at the end of the day, right? That's always been what I have gotten from him. That's always been the vibe I've gotten from him. And, I don't even have a problem with his pro-life thing, like, I don't think Roe v. Wade is in any danger of being overturned after, like, looking into how how SCOTUS works. And even if it is, if it goes back to being a matter of states' rights, I really don't have a problem if some women have to get on a bus and cross state lines in order to get their abortions. I don't necessarily think that inconveniencing people is the same as denying them certain services and certain rights. Like, he can't make it illegal. It would take a completely different, even if Roe v. Wade was struck down tomorrow, right? It would take a completely different court case and a completely different judicial decision, right, in order to bring about a blanket U.S.-wide ban on abortion.
Yeah. Aside from the fact that if Alison is right about her mountain climber anchor, metaphor,
it's never going to happen.
There'd be a lot of the people wouldn't want it, and a lot of Republicans probably wouldn't want to change it.
But the thing about Roe v. Wade is we're to the point in the United States right now where it would be prohibition again. If you overturn Roe v. Wade today, with the social attitudes that exist today, and with the network surrounding the profession, the industry that depends on abortion and the attitudes surrounding abortion, it would just be prohibition. That if people want to get rid of abortion, the law is not going to be an effective way to do it. It's not a smart way to do it. And and this is, you call me a pro-lifer, because I can't say specifically that I am just anti-abortion, because I'm also anti-death penalty, and I have some other opinions that I'm not even going to get into right here. But the thing is, that approach is not the right approach.
Yeah, no.
To reducing or eliminating the incidence of abortion.
Well, and
I think people are starting, even other pro-lifers are starting to recognize that. And I think a politician that tried to get in there and just outlaw it or even attack it by other legal means is going to fail. It's destined to fail.
He's destined to fail not just because of that, but because there has been a pro-life judge, an extremely pro-life judge on the bench on SCOTUS, right, who has twice ruled that, this case is not enough to overturn Roe v. Wade. The judges that are appointed to SCOTUS, they have an obligation to the Constitution and they have an obligation to precedent, right? And there is now 40 years or more of precedent regarding Roe v. Wade. You cannot just undo that on a whim. You have to actually have a massively good reason to do that. Somebody has to make the perfect argument, the argument to end all arguments, in order to even convince a pro-life judge to actually vote in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade. They'll vote against overturning it, even if they're pro-life, if they don't think that the legal argument is sound, or if they don't think that the precedent that exists to this date supports them doing that, right? So it's not going to happen, and the longer it stays a legal precedent, the harder it's going to ever be to get rid of it. It's like the entire idea of Roe v. Wade being overturned is a fucking pipe dream, even though it was based on something really fucking stupid.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
The Feast of Fools is a release valve. The church puts us all in a pressure cooker and then gives us a festival to take the pressure off. So we learn to endure instead of rebel. Which invites a question. If the zealots in the streets are there to provide a distraction and make us all think something has been accomplished, then what pressure, what new form of control is Trump the release valve for? I guess it all hinges on one thing. Do you trust the media to lie, honestly?
Oh.
All right, that's the end of the video. So this series isn't over yet.
Do you trust the media to lie? Honestly, this is the thing. This is the thing. Who's better at lying? And how are they lying? And what are they lying about?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do you know the answer to that question?
Allison, I hate you, Allison. Fuck you.
So I guess one of the main, and we're getting to 2 hours, so we gotta call it in a few minutes here. But she's got another video coming, so there's more to this. This is not the end. So those of you guys who want to rage and like unsub and run off because of like how sort of this might appear bleak, but there's more to it than this. And this is like where Alison and I are like discussing, because I don't think that Trump was ever meant to be some kind of a savior. There's a lot of rejoicing because it is a blow. For some, it's a blow against, social justice warriors and regressives and cry-bullies online. And it's also a blow against the establishment, the left and the right. And it's the flyover country. Like you have people right now, right, that are calling for a removal of the electoral college because they don't like the way the results came out. And the fact is that if they did that, then the Democrats would win every election until the end of time, because the way that the reason why we have electoral college is based on population density, and the places that have the highest amounts of population density, like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, they tend to vote Democrat, and there are more people there than there is in all the other parts of the country, where there's a lot of, there's still like some larger cities, but there's a great deal of rural country. And the people who live in those areas are actually the ones that they are the backbone of the country. They put food on our table. They do all kinds of stuff that we need them for. But people who live in the city that work in their IT departments, and they go to their Starbucks and they sip coffee and they complain about they repeat what Trevor Noah or John Oliver said the other night. They don't actually know how this works, and so they want to basically have the popular vote, but they're going to screw over a whole bunch of people.
They've never eaten a piece of meat that didn't come wrapped in plastic.
Yeah,
that's essentially what it is. And this Canada had an issue back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, where the West was actually threatening to secede. I mean, everybody who knows anything about Canadian politics will know that Quebec has held referendums in terms of Quebec separating from Canada, right?
Yeah.
But nobody on the world stage probably knows that there was a point for about 5 years where there was a political party called the Western Canada Concept, right, that was suggesting that everybody west of Manitoba, right, so Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia just separate from Canada. Just fuck all you all, right, because we have all the fucking fish, we have all the fucking oil, we have all the fucking trees, we have all the fucking cattle, we have all the fucking wheat, right? We have all the coal. We have all the natural gas, right? We have all of the fucking resources. We have all the gold, right? And all the freaking diamond mines and all the copper and all the everything. And Quebec and Ontario have all the fucking mouths.
Yeah. That's
And
the,
they have all the votes.
equalization payments,
And they
right?
can fucking set it up however they want. And they can screw us however they like. We
Yeah.
just don't have enough mouths. Right?
Yeah.
And it took threatening to separate from Canada to get the federal government to start treating us fairly.
And see what one of the things that I don't think has really been explained here. This wasn't just a victory in the U.S. Between left and right.
Yeah.
We had a situation where the elites in our government, the elites in our political parties, had made an agreement as to who was going to be our next leader. And they did everything they could to manipulate the election to make it so regardless of what the people wanted or were interested in, to the point of actually manipulating what the people thought they wanted based on what they presented. And it was such a degree of corruption in the presentation of information that they had the whole mainstream establishment media. This is why I've been calling the establishment media what I call them, that they've had the establishment media in on that. This is an actual conspiracy that came out. If you paid attention to the WikiLeaks dumps, to the email dumps, and what has been coming out of those email dumps, what we had here was essentially a coup. It was a bloodless coup, because we got told we were going to have Hillary Clinton as our next leader.
Well, I'm not really sure
We
that
got
it was
presented.
I'm not sure that it was bloodless, though. There
Well-
were some people that disappeared and like fell on bullets.
Yeah, there were
and
some
stuff
people
like
that disappeared, but as far as there was no battle, there was no fighting, there was no, open people getting their guns out and shooting at each other
Right,
war.
right.
But this was, I would call this a bloodless coup, and it was fought almost entirely on the internet. This actually really
in the banking factories of the internet.
right.
This is
So essentially what we've had is we've had a victory over the establishment. Now, that's not saying that Trump's not establishment in his own way, but we have had a victory over our elites telling us what we were going to take, what we were going to have as our leader, and what we were going to be governed by. And it's, everybody likes to dump all this hate on Hillary Clinton. She wasn't alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
She was a part of this. She was a big part of it, but this wasn't Hillary the devil controlling all of elitist Washington for her own personal gain. This was elitist Washington taking one of their team members, Hillary Clinton, from Team Elite and putting her into a key position. And they failed because the people of the United States stood up and told them no. That's what the victory is. It doesn't mean that everything Trump does we have to like. It doesn't mean that we have to in any way, shape, or form
Be complacent.
like canonize Trump or make him something special.
Yeah.
What it means is that we have proved that we can be vigilant, that we can be that we can be empowered to take control of the administration of our country, and that we can decide who's going to be in charge, and it's us.
Well, when you look at like what she had, her arsenal, right? She had hundreds of millions of dollars.
And apparently
Right?
at least 3 million illegal voters in California.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, she
I
had
do
hundreds of
apologize
millions
for
of
the vocal fry that's getting mentioned in the chat. I also have either a sinus infection or I'm having an allergic attack. So that's why I sound like this.
Go ahead.
But she had hundreds of millions of dollars. She had illegal voters. She had the entire backing of the DNC. Trump had freaking former Republican presidents, first ladies, chiefs of staff, right? All of these people saying either they were going to abstain from endorsing him or they were outright going to vote against him. They were going to vote for Hillary, right? That's what he had to work with. Media on her side. She had the media going, oh, the emails, is it really, she said it was a mistake and that should be enough. She apologized, right?
No, better than that. The CNN, they released a statement where they said, look, it's illegal to go through the emails. You just wait until we tell you what's in them, and then you'll know what's in them. And that was like
without even addressing the fact that it doesn't matter what was in them.
Yeah.
But here's the fucking thing too. 91%, according to a right-wing source, right, that actually ran an algorithm on the mainstream media coverage of Donald Trump, 91% was negative. The other 9% wasn't positive. It was either positive or neutral, right? And then you have the head of CNN, right, saying, oh, well, I guess our big mistake was actually playing his rallies start to finish without editing them. And that's why he got elected, because we actually allowed people to watch everything he said, and we didn't selectively edit him word for word, one word at a time saying, I rape people, right, and I molest children, right?
Well, more than that.
What? We let him say his piece start to finish and didn't spin it, and that was our big mistake, right?
Yeah.
And the entire fucking thing, you would think, because there's this whole discussion now among liberals, right? Among the elitist liberal media. Right? And the entire fucking thing seems to be, oh, well, Hillary made a serious gaffe when she called those people themselves deplorable, rather than just addressing their deplorable attitudes and their deplorable beliefs, their deplorable ignorance. And that led them to deplorably vote for literally Hitler, right? Like they haven't fucking re-examined anything.
Well, and it's not just it wasn't just the news media, and it wasn't just all the political power and all the dollars and the illegal voters, but she had academics, she had the entertainment industry. There were actors coming out. Lena Dunham, Madonna was offering blowjobs, and fucking Joss Whedon and all of his crony actors came out and they made a plea, and they're really like, elitist fashion. They had everything. Beyonce, Jay-Z, like just tons of shit, and none of it stuck.
Yeah, and Trump had himself, right? Yeah. Trump had himself and a bunch of establishment Republicans saying, we don't fucking like this guy, and 90% negative media coverage. That's what he had. And then he had some random fucking dude putting together crappy fucking videos on some panel that he started called Can't Stump the Trump, right? With air horns blowing and fucking that Centipede song. And that's what he had. And he had Pepe.
Yeah. Well, he was good on social media and stuff. And he was really good about campaigning, like visiting a lot of states, especially the...
Well, he had himself.
Yeah.
He had himself.
That was him having himself. But to go to the original point, Hannah makes the best point about this whole thing. Whereas, the victory, the excitement around the Trump victory, it doesn't mean that we can now like rest on our laurels and the fight for men's rights is over, because we know that this is something way bigger than political power, political positions. I mean, I remember hearing Trump in a speech once say, guys, we got problems too. The girls got it pretty good. But that was just like, I don't know if he was paying lip service, but he's not, like in Trump Tower thinking about men's issues. He likely doesn't know about them because most people don't. So he's not going to fix that stuff. Yes, we're still going to be stuck in this church, as Alison puts it, as long as people are not willing to step outside of it, back away, and look at reality as it is.
He is willing to shoot down an angry feminist who stands up in one of his freaking rallies or town hall meetings and says, "Where's your guarantee that I'll be paid the same as a man?" And he says to her, "You'll be paid the same if you do as good a job." Bam.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. We put a human being in office, just like in every other election, we put a human being in office. And human beings, all of us, every single one of us, has the flaw of only being able to see things from our own perspective to a degree.
Except for me.
You know, we
Except for
can
me. I don't have
look
any
at other
thoughts.
perspectives, and we can try to understand other perspectives. We can try to understand information that is outside of our experience. That you know, we can try to take the filters off with which we usually look at information. But remembering Trump's position on the Central Park Five, I think it was what they were labeled, the guys that were accused of rape that turned out to be innocent, that he never has given up calling them guilty and railing that they should be punished. This is a man who can make mistakes, just like any other man, just like any woman. He can make mistakes, and like I've said about us, be vigilant toward us. Be vigilant toward Trump too. Be vigilant. You cannot have a democratic system without eternal vigilance, and it is our job as citizens, because these politicians, when they get into office, we have hired them to do a job for us. It is our job to manage them. We are the managers. We are the boss. But you cannot, as the boss, just sit around at home and let your employees run the shop without ever going in and checking on them. It's our job to give them feedback. It's our job to watch what they do. It's our job to tell them when we think they're doing it wrong. And I will point out, during the Republican primary, one of my most disgusted moments during that primary was, I can't even remember what the question was, but every single politician on the stage, Trump included, went bent over backwards, answering the question with what they were going to do in office for women. Nobody was questioned about what they were going to do for men, and nobody said anything about what they were going to do for men or what they were going to do for boys, because it wasn't considered important, and nobody brought it up. It's our job to bring it up. And like Brian Malman put a good point into the chat. Trump has sons. This is a thing that we can find
Leverage.
common ground with our employees in political office on. Many of them have sons. They have brothers. They have fathers. They have friends and neighbors and coworkers. Many of them are men. The ones that are women, many of them have husbands. So this isn't something that we're asking them to have sympathy for aliens. But they're not going to know this is important to the American people if we don't tell them. And it is our job to be vigilant in that way. And I want to bring something else up, because it's also something that I've seen discussed in chat. And I'm not going into this with the idea of starting a long discussion on it. I'm not going to start bringing up names. I'm not going to start talking about specific people. But there's been a big disagreement related to this women worsting thing, and religion and out groups and so on in the men's rights movement. And it's okay that there is a big disagreement over it. Now, the other side of the disagreement, from whatever side you're on, being on the other side of that disagreement does not make people evil or bad or not MRAs. We have a thing that we have a focus on, and that thing is equal recognition and consideration for human rights and equal accountability under the law. That is the bottom line. And if we are all working towards that, even if we disagree on other things, whether we disagree on liberal versus conservative, whether we disagree on women worsting versus not women worsting in other cultures, we have to be able to not demonize each other in these arguments. So I'm gonna ask, don't hate on people because you disagree with them over stuff like this. It's fine to say, I disagree. It's fine to say, I think that idea is an idiotic idea. But let's not start booting people out of the movement because we think they're making a mistake.
Yeah.
These things need to be discussed, and we should argue about them. And it's okay if it gets heated. It's okay if we yell at each other about this stuff. It's okay if we tell each other off. But let's not start booting people out of the movement and othering each other, because we're not big enough to make up for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to say for anybody, because I know that there are people in my audience who are actually very, very leery, very wary of a Trump presidency. And I just want to ask them to go back and review the press coverage of Hillary versus the press coverage of Trump, and really ask themselves an honest question as to whether they think Trump is going to be able to get away with anything bad. Anything, like if he's going to be able to get away with becoming the next literally Hitler. If he's going to be, like, the press has been on his ass second of every fucking day from day one, nitpicking every fucking thing that's ever come out of his mouth, right? Going back 20 years to find something that they can criticize, right? And they have been hand-waving away. Arguably, it's either incompetence or malfeasance that she was using a private email server to, deal with her business as the Secretary of State. So one or the other, she's either incompetent or she intentionally did it because she doesn't think the rules apply to her, right? At how the press covered both of these candidates, and ask yourself, line, are you going to know it?
Right.
18 seconds later. If Hillary stepped out of line, is the press even going to fucking bother?
Yeah. Are we even going to find out about it?
Right? That's what I would say.
Yeah.
To people who are worried about a Trump presidency. Press, a mainstream press who hates him so much that he won't be able to get away with fucking picking his nose in public.
Well, he did go and have a steak dinner and didn't tell anybody. So we're already on the way. All right. Well, anyway, that's the show. We gotta stop it here. But I want to add one more message at the end, and that is apparently there is a Change.org petition trying to save the Sydney, Australia red pill screening from being pulled down. I put a link in the low bar already if you guys want to sign it. I don't really have a lot of faith in petitions, but it does show, we can probably use it to demonstrate that we really want this to be shown. But apparently, the Western Sydney Skeptic Society campus social group is trying to get the first Sydney screening of the documentary of the Red Pill up. However, it has now been decided by the Sport and Community Services Manager, the very same person that approved it, to now hold back from purchasing the screening package for unspecified reasons. So we want to, help them out, go to the thing, sign the petition, but maybe reach out to them to see if there's anything you can do. If you happen to be in Sydney and you're watching right now, thanks for staying up so late. I'm not really sure. See what you can do. But I am pointing it out. I have done my due diligence and made the statement. So hopefully we can save it. Apparently, Australia really doesn't want this movie to be shown for some fucking reason. So, Baring, if you see this, or Bane666, spread the word. Maybe you guys can help make sure that it is shown, or find an alternative place to show it, and maybe that will work out. So that's it. Do any of you guys have any final words or anything that you want to throw in there? I saw, Hannah, you were or did you already say the thing you wanted to say? No?
Yeah, I already said the thing I wanted to say. It was basically the thing about not
demonizing people,
fracturing the movement.
Yeah.
like I said, we've got some stuff that we do have vehement disagreements on in the movement, and there's more than one issue on which, like, the non-intactivist versus the intactivist is another one. We all have to be able to work together on issues that we all support, and if you're not an intactivist, you don't have to support intactivism.
Yeah.
But you can still work with intactivists on fathers' rights issues and due process rights, and if you're an atheist, you should still be able to work with religious people on those issues. And if you're religious, you should still be able to work with atheists on those issues. We have to be able to do this, or we will never accomplish anything. That's it.
All right.
Agreed.
Okay, so I want to thank you guys for coming on. Thanks, Anna Cherry. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Brian. And, I did it again. And we're going to, for those of you guys...
you should have said thank you, Nipple Dog.
Nipple dogs, yeah. Nobody can see the nipple dog. But you've seen it before. It's the one that Jennifer Daw made for me with the little paws in front. So for the special patron after show, we're going to have Alison come on and answer questions about her video. And so, there'll be another part. So maybe we'll do this again for the next one when she unveils the next stage in her argument. In the meantime, guys, we'll see you next time on Honey Badger Radio.